Imagine an entire army freezing in the middle of a white hell, fighting not only against their enemies, but also against a merciless nature. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir during the Korean War became one of the most tragic lessons about how devastating winter can be in wartime. In this video, we will reveal how, despite a massive number of advancing Chinese soldiers, many perished due to the extreme cold, facing a winter that spared no one. How did an entire army freeze to death? Let's find out. After the end of World War II and the adoption of the United Nations Charter in 1945, the UN was established to prevent the outbreak of another global war. Its main goal was to create a council that would bring together the world's great powers to resolve disputes through peaceful means, avoiding the need for violence. When North Korea invaded South Korea, this attack was an early test for the UN's ability to prevent conflicts, especially since key Security Council members supported opposing sides. However, the UN decided to intervene directly, and on July 7, 1950, the United Nations Command UNC was created, consisting primarily of American and British troops under the command of General Douglas MacArthur. The UNC's mission was to stop and push back the North Korean advance. Within weeks, American troops stationed in Japan and the United States were deployed to South Korea. By November 1950, UN forces had managed to push North Korean troops far beyond the 38th parallel. The intervention seemed incredibly effective, so much so that many North Korean soldiers were forced back into China. However, the situation would soon change drastically. Although the UNC was unaware, China was preparing to enter the war. At the time, UNC intelligence estimated that only 300 Chinese soldiers were positioned near the front line. Even though clashes had already occurred in November, Chinese forces were not considered a significant threat. In reality, China had stationed hundreds of thousands of troops around the front line. The UNC made two critical mistakes: underestimating the real number of Chinese troops in the area and failing to consider the possibility of intervention by a powerful communist neighbor. This miscalculation led to one of the war's most dramatic moments, the Battle of Chosin Reservoir. At the time, approximately 16,000 American soldiers, mostly from the 1st and 7th Marine Divisions, were positioned near the reservoir, while a Chinese army of 150,000 soldiers was gathering for a surprise attack. On the night of November 27th, the Chinese launched their assault, completely catching the Americans off guard. The 1st, 5th and 7th Marine Divisions quickly found themselves in a desperate situation. A few days before the Chinese offensive, the Marines had reached the town of Hagaru-ri, where they had started building an airstrip. This airstrip was meant to facilitate supply deliveries for future operations against North Korea. However, the Chinese attack came much sooner than expected, and the much-needed supplies did not arrive on time. The situation was so critical that even under enemy fire, American forces continued to work on the airstrip. As Hagaru-ri was bombarded and American positions in Kotori, Hudongni-Kotori and other areas near the reservoir came under intense fire, waves of Chinese soldiers kept attacking, even managing to break through certain lines. Yet the Marines held their ground, repelling the attackers. But as the battle raged on, another enemy began to take its toll, the unforgiving cold. Although winter had not officially begun, temperatures steadily dropped to as low as -5 degrees Celsius or 23 degrees Fahrenheit. Even with their winter gear, many American soldiers suffered severe frostbite, some even losing toes due to prolonged exposure. The Chinese soldiers, however, were far less equipped for the brutal conditions. Most wore quilted cotton uniforms with simple cloth caps, and their poor quality footwear provided little protection against the freezing temperatures. As mentioned earlier, the Chinese army was ill-prepared for winter warfare. The 9th Army Group, the main Chinese force sent to Korea, began its march towards Chosin Reservoir through an extremely difficult 18-day trek across mountainous and isolated terrain. To avoid air attacks, Chinese troops moved only at night, eating whatever they could find, cats, dogs, and even rats. But exhaustion and hunger took their toll. Many soldiers fell behind, promising to rejoin their units later, but never waking up, succumbing to the freezing cold instead. The Chinese command quickly realized the severity of the situation. If the food crisis wasn't resolved, the Ninth Army could starve to death before even reaching the battlefield. The solution came in the form of thousands of Chinese and Korean civilians who were mobilized to bake and deliver 68 tons of bread daily for the troops. However, most of this bread never reached the front lines, and desertions increased until entire units abandoned their positions. Despite these hardships, the Ninth Army pressed on. After 2 weeks of marching, the soldiers were weak and exhausted, easy victims of the extreme cold. Many collapsed into the snow and never got up. Worse, many of their weapons froze. Soldiers were unable to load their rifles because of the extreme temperatures. In a desperate move, some who could no longer handle their grenades due to frostbite resorted to charging American positions armed only with knives, hoping for a miracle. Yet some soldiers kept moving, drawn by the warm boots and food left behind by fallen American troops, prioritizing survival over combat. The freezing temperatures reached their peak on December 6th, when the mercury plummeted to -20 degrees Celsius, or -4 degrees Fahrenheit. That morning, US forces launched an attack on Chinese positions. When they reached the top of a hill, they were met with a horrifying sight. An entire Chinese company frozen solid in their trenches, victims of the relentless cold. In the following weeks, the cold and battle wounds continued to devastate the Ninth Army. By mid-December, out of the 150,000 Chinese troops initially deployed in November, fewer than 20,000 were still combat-ready. Shockingly, nearly 30,000 Chinese soldiers perished from the cold, far surpassing those lost in combat, approximately 19,000. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir went down in history not just because tens of thousands of Chinese soldiers froze to death, but also for its significant impact in 3 key areas. First, China's intervention changed the course of the war. The Chinese army prevented an almost certain North Korean defeat and prolonged the conflict for another 2 years. As a result of this strategic failure, General MacArthur was dismissed from his command the following year. The battle highlighted how American media could shape public perception of foreign wars. It foreshadowed the role media would play in future conflicts, such as the Vietnam War, when television coverage became widespread and deeply influenced public opinion. Chosin Reservoir became a remarkable example of American resilience and courage. Although the battle was not a clear military victory, the 1st, 5th, and 7th Marine Divisions demonstrated extraordinary determination against overwhelming odds, marking a defining moment in US Marine Corps history.